Hi, this is my review of the Battletech Introductory Box Set. This video will probably serve as a very small introduction to Battletech as well. And the title of this box set, that is an introductory box set, is somewhat misleading because this contains a lot. You could basically play your entire life just using this box set if you want to remain at that level of play when it comes to Battletech. Now let's talk about the contents, but at the same time I'm going to be talking about the story and the theme of Battletech, as well as how you play the game, and at the end I'm going to give you my thoughts overall. Well, this box set, as I was telling you, contains all of the rules that you need to keep on playing and playing and playing. You even have all the rules to build your own mechs and all of the basic information to build your own scenarios, to use all of the mechs included here in all sorts of situations. As to the contents, you get a couple of simple 2 6-sided dice, and you get a lot of mechs. I still have to paint them, almost all of them, but you have a lot, like 24 mechs in total. I've actually painted one of them, the Atlas. It's one of the most powerful mechs at this level of introductory play. Let me see if I can get that one into focus. Let me see. Okay. As I was telling you, this is one of the most powerful mechs, if not the most powerful mech included in the box. He does have a few weak points that you can exploit, but this is one of my favorite ones to use. And you also, well, the box itself, it's quite sturdy, and you can store everything in a very organized way. You have these boxes to keep all the different mech miniatures and the dice. You also have these map sheets, and these map sheets are the ones that you're going to use to play the game. They are also quite sturdy and large. They represent different rivers and forests and beaches and open ground. All of the hexes are marked with numbers, and they have information as to what type of cover each feature of the battlefield gives your mech. You can hide behind mountains and trees, within forests, underwater. There are even level depressions, that is the different ground or areas are below level 1 or 2 or above level 3, and you have to take all of that into consideration as to where you can move, how much it costs for your mech to move from one level to another that is going down a slope, to put it in a way, or going up a mountain. And the map sheets are different. This one is a bit more advanced, and all of the roads also have different rules if you decide to play at a bit more advanced level when it comes to the entire rule set of Battletech. You also have different books and sheets. First, let me show you the sort of like the cheat sheets, or rather cheat boards that you use to play the game. Let's see if I can get that into focus. Here it is. And all of that information you will need to take into consideration when you play Battletech. It seems quite intimidating at first, and I will get into that in a bit. So you have 2 of them, obviously quite useful for 2 players, and they are quite sturdy. And you get these sheets that basically serve as ways to keep track of the different damage that your mech is suffering. Let me see if I can get this into order. Here they are. This is an introductory. Let me see if I can. Okay. An introductory version of the sheets. because the complete Battletech sheets kind of look like this. As you can see, there are many details for each part of the mech: arms, legs, torso, details on the weapons that mech is carrying, also details on the ability of the pilot, the pilot's gunnery skill. There are a lot of things to take into consideration when you play the game, but as you play, that is with practice, all of that will become more and more simple or easy to grasp. You also have this nice little guide. Let me see if I can show it to you. Here it is. It's a painting and tactics guide. And it teaches you how to paint the different mechs step by step. It's in full color. The paper in general of all the books included in the introductory box set, it's high quality, it's quite glossy. Although I did pour a drop of sweat when I was playing once, and that part of the paper became a bit, not exactly wrinkly, but it seems a bit more fragile. So don't put too much, don't be too rough on the paper. Another cool thing about this little guide is that you have tips on how to play all of the different mechs. You also have examples of how to paint them. And you have all the different tips, because some mechs are better like for hit and run attacks. Some of them are better to positioning them in the top of a mountain, for example, and attacking from there, sort of like mobile artillery. And some of the others are just, they're kind of like tanks. Well, we'll get into that in a few minutes, but you can basically use them as sort of like a shield for the rest of your forces. And so there is quite a bit of strategy and tactics as to how to deploy and use your Battlemechs in combat. You also have, well, this is just like information on other Catalyst games and role-playing games. This is a quick start rules booklet, and you have two simple scenarios. Oh no, just one, sorry, to use to get you started into how to playing the game. Although I felt a bit, even though I think that these quick start rules do a good job at getting you started, I think it would have been presented a bit more fun. The scenario feels too one-sided. One of the mechs has quite a bit of an advantage over the other, in my opinion, to the point that I have yet to see someone beat the other player. That is, someone not playing as a hunchback actually winning. That's the name of one of the mechs, hunchback. And so these quick start rules are just like something that you should read and use and immediately go into the main rulebook. You also have this map of the entire inner sphere, this section of space where all of the battles are being carried out. This is a huge map. Let me see if I can open it carefully. All of the colors show you the different factions. The areas they are ruling over. It's all about the immersion. Many things in Battletech are just there to make you believe that the entire Battletech conflict is actually happening. Then you have this other booklet which says how the core rule books work. As I was telling you, this is a really complex game and you need a rule book that tells you how to use the rules, the other rules. As I was saying, it's in full color. It also has more information on what other books you need to buy if you want to expand the level of gameplay. And that's something that I really love of Battletech. Every rulebook, every aspect of the rules, and taking them all as a whole, as a cohesive system. Each part of that system focuses on a different scale of the conflict. So, for example, the role-playing game at Time of War, it's a bit more zoomed in to the point that you see what happens in the lives of the different mech warriors, the pilots that drive these machines. And in Total Warfare, or even this introductory box set, you see the different conflicts, that different lances, that think of them as squads of Battlemechs, of the different fights they carry out. But if you decide to get other books such as strategic operations, interstellar operations, I'm not exactly sure that there's another one that is like at a campaign level. You will be able to fight with battalions and even plan out the conquest of different parts of space. So it's all up to you. You have to think to what level of play you wish to participate in this entire epic, ever-living, ever-changing saga of Battletech. And then you have the Inner Sphere at a Glance rulebook, or rather book. This contains all of the Battletech mythology with full color illustrations and a lot of fiction. You get some short stories so that you get a sense of the war. You can also see how the map changes as the timeline moves forward. You can see the map above is quite different from below, that is a bit further on in the timeline, into the future. You also have information on the different houses of Battletech. You don't get any special rules for different houses, but you do have all of the flavor and stories, and you get a strong sense of the character of each of the houses, and other powers as well outside of that ruling structure. You also have information on the mech warrior. As you can see here, this is a mech warrior, although it looks somewhat like cyberpunk. But I will talk about why they are dressed like that in a few minutes. You also have information on different mechs included in the introductory box set, all of the stats, and some information gets quite technical. Maybe not so much in this introductory box set, but in other books it really gets quite technical, and that's to that level of realism. Let's talk a bit about the story of Battletech. You could focus on any part of the timeline and have really exciting battles following those storylines and themes, but it's basically a universe of war. Probably my favorite sections of the timeline, it's first at the beginning, where you have these houses that feel a bit like feudal houses. That is, you feel like it's a war between feudal lords, kind of like in the Middle Ages or a bit after that, and they start to, well, they cannot reach an agreement. They are fighting against each other. Everyone is out there for his or her own house, until the Camerons decide to establish the Star League. And the Star League is basically a way to try to play nice together, to put it in a way, and they start eliminating those that are causing conflict. And they try to establish a sort of order over the inner sphere, or that area in space where the entire conflict is happening. But eventually the Camerons only have one successor, a very young boy. And this young boy is assassinated by a member of another house, and he starts to take over things unlawfully. And there is this general, Alexander Kerensky, who is not too happy about that and carries out a war against this usurper, and he kills him and his entire family so that they do not try to continue to usurp power. But to the sadness of Alexander Kerensky, all of the other members of the Star League, once that is done with, they once again they start fighting against one another, trying to claim leadership over the entire Star League. So disappointed, Kerensky goes away with his the men and women under his command, and they start to, let's say, evolve or develop as a different type of race. They even insert a bit of like genetic manipulation in there, and they start to seek out this let's say state of perfection as a warrior race. In the meantime, the Star League keeps on fighting and fighting and fighting, and they almost never reach like complete peace, although there is a level that they reach a relative state of stability, although the fighting keeps on going. But then, well, I recommend, I'm going to put a link in the description below so that you can watch the opening for an old Battletech cartoon, and that sums things quite a bit. There is a time when the clans go back and they have this sort of like we are the perfect race and we will conquer you, that you were always fighting against each other. But as one you would expect, anyone who has studied the different conflicts throughout history, when there is a certain group of people that starts to claim that is superior to everyone else and starts conquering, well, that makes everyone else to forget about their enmities and their conflicts, and they become allies against this common foe, and that's exactly what happens. It's the Star League against the clans. And funny enough, throughout the conflict, some of the members of the clans actually go to the side of the Star League, and by the end of the conflict, when they actually manage to not completely defeat but at least neutralize that initial assault of the clans, the clans have already inhabited that part of the inner sphere quite close to the members of the Star League, so they once again become part of that conflict. And that's just a small part of the Battletech history. You could delve into many different subplots and other things further into the past or into the future of the timeline. Perhaps something related to Comstar and the Jihad, when the Word of Blake, which are kind of like religious fanatics that worship this communications engineer, and they start to carry out this jihad against the rest of the houses and even the Comstar itself. And the timeline is actually quite complex. I'm sure I could go into better details or explain it a lot better, but it's quite difficult. And so you have all that timeline, and they have many source books and fiction and novels that examine or zoom in further into different aspects of the conflict. So you can have all sorts of missions and adventures, depending if you are using the role-playing game or the Battletech board game, because it's actually a board game. It feels like a miniatures board game, but it's officially a board game. Although it can be played without the boards, there are rules for that. And then you have the introductory rulebook. And here you have all the rules that you need in full color, almost perfectly explained. Some parts of the rules, I think they could have been explained a bit better. Not all of them. Overall, the rulebook does a great job. I think I did notice a mistake. There aren't many typos or errors, but I did notice something that didn't make too much sense. But overall, you have all the different rules, explanations as to how to play the game. And as I was telling you, it's quite awesome that they included, they include several missions, like 4 or 6. And you have all the information to create your own Battlemechs from scratch. Now let's talk about how you play Battletech. Okay, as I was telling you, I'm going to try to keep things simple. Depending on the mission, you have a certain objective. Usually you have to cripple your opponent's mechs, that is, destroy their legs or destroy their weapons, or some other missions require you to get from one side of the map to the other. And each turn is divided into 6 phases. You have the initiative phase, where you determine who goes first, and you have the movement phase, in which you move your mechs. This is going to be alternating your mechs. It's not everyone moves and then your enemy moves. You move one mech first you move your mech, and then your enemy moves his or her mechs, and so on. And there are also more details as to how to handle when, for example, your enemy has more mechs than you. Then he will have to move a few more mechs than you per turn, per phase. And then you have the weapon attack phase, using well, I would say all of your weapons, but it depends. Some weapons have different ranges, and sometimes you don't want to use weapons that are more suited for shorter range when your enemy is too far away. And you also have the physical attack phase, when you get to attack with your with punches or kicks, or trying to jump on top of your opponent, which is known as death from above, which is kind of like a suicidal attack. And then you have the hit phase, and this is where things managing hit it plays a big part in Battletech. If you are always shooting all of your weapons all the time, your mech will start to heat up, and you will suffer many negative effects because of that. So, for example, you will start moving less and less. That is, you will not be able to cover enough ground as you decide to walk or run. Or you will start to act quite clumsy when firing. If your pilot is not skilled enough, you're going to have a really hard time when shooting. And your mech could also shut down if you do not pass a check, and you will not be able to move, and that is quite dangerous. So you really have to take hit into consideration. You will have to think about if you want to use that extra missile launcher or gun, if it's worth it to actually risk overheating. And your pilot could also take damage. That is, as your mech pilot suffers perhaps a hit to the head, or your mech falls down because of weapons attacks, or if you are moving clumsily underwater and you miss a check, your pilot could take physical damage, and you could actually end up knocked out or even dying inside of your battle mech. So everything, you have to think about all of those things. Now, as you take damage, you'll have to mark all of these little circles. So, for example, if you took damage to the torso, central torso, you'll have to mark each circle as it fills up. And that damage will transfer to the internal structure of your mech, and it translates, or that is, the damage travels from one part of your mech to the other. So, for example, if your arm is destroyed and there was more damage because they attacked you with a barrage of missiles, or they used a very powerful laser of sorts, then that damage will be transferred inwards. So your arm, the damage suffered to your, let's say, your right arm, transfers to your right torso, and if that right torso is destroyed, it transfers to the central torso. And if you get your head or your torso destroyed, your mech warrior will die. And as I was telling you, if you saw the other illustration of mech warrior that I showed you a few minutes ago, they are dressed quite scantily. They are in shorts and like with a shirt, and that's because of the heat. The Battlemechs accumulate a lot of heat, and they are dressed like that to withstand those high temperatures. And they are somewhat like mentally linked to the mech, so that's why too much damage to certain parts could actually harm the pilot, and you could also get hit in your ammunitions, the different niches or depots across your mech. If there is an ammo explosion, it usually results in the destruction of that mech. Not always, but it's quite dangerous. So you have to think about all of those different things, because as you move your mech, and mechs here move a bit like walking tanks. They are not like Gundam or in Robotech, they are not quite as fast or agile. They're more like walking tanks, and you even have to spend movement points to move them from to one side and from one side to another. If you are you decide to run, you cannot. You cannot run backwards and such. You can jump, but it adds a bit of hit to the entire mech. You have to take all of that into consideration when moving across the forests and the mountains. And as I was telling you, it costs quite a bit to get from into one type of terrain, or to go down a slope or up a mountain, or going to the water. Going to the water is quite useful if you want to cool down, because your hit sinks, which are usually located in the torso, but there are also hit sinks located in, for example, the legs. You could a good tactic is getting your mech into the water so that you can shoot all of your weapons and not hit up as fast as you usually would. So there is a lot of strategy and tactics as to where you're going to put your battle mech and how you're going to proceed. And when it comes to close quarters combat, that's also I also enjoy it quite a bit. You can kick and you can punch, and you don't accumulate hit when carrying out those types of attacks. So sometimes, if let's say that you have been shooting all the time and your mech is overheating, it could be worth it to run at your enemy and try to destroy the enemy mech just by punching it or kicking it and such. And so there is quite a bit of strategy. As I was telling you, I could go further into details on how to stand up, about your mech falling, the different rolls that you do when you take damage, because when you take damage, it's somewhat random. You roll your dice and you see if that damage is applied to the legs, to the arms, and it also, the facing of your mech also takes that into consideration, or it could give you an advantage if you are too damaged. So for example, let's say that you have suffered too many hits to your left side. You could start walking while presenting your right side towards your opponent, so that way there is a bigger chance of getting damage on your right side rather than on your left, and you will survive a bit more like that. And if you take damage from behind, that's really dangerous. Your torso is quite weak, your armor is quite weak, and you could end up destroyed quite easily, especially if you get hit by one of the most powerful weapons. That adds a bit of randomness to Battletech, not so much that it becomes too random. That is, an experienced Battletech player is going to have a huge advantage against someone who has just started playing. But there are some lucky hits that sometimes you make an attack with a very feeble weapon and you actually hit the head of an enemy mech, and maybe that causes the pilot to get knocked unconscious, and then you have an easier time destroying that mech as the opponent desperately tries to make the rolls to wake up. So that's quite interesting. Now let me tell you what I think overall of the entire introductory box set, the value for it and the gameplay. Well, what you get in the box, it's perfect. As I was telling you, if you want to remain at this level of gameplay, you can play hours and hours and hours. This is going to last you as long as you want. I don't know how much it is selling currently, and the prices may vary depending on the sale that you managed to get, but the content is great overall. And the quality of the plastic is also quite good, and the map sheets are sturdy, the booklets are sturdy and glossy as well. Everything is well explained and written. Now, as to the gameplay, I think there will be some players that will find Battletech too intimidating. If you're looking for something more streamlined and simple, there is a more simple style of play when it comes to Battletech. I think it was called Alpha Strike, and they simplify things a bit more there, but this is classic Battletech. And this is for those of you that do not mind adding modifiers depending on the distance at which you are attacking and the different damage that you suffer to the different actuators and the gyros and the engines. All of that affects your mech in some way or another. Maybe you move a bit slower, maybe you cannot move at all. Sometimes, if, for example, if your legs are destroyed, or maybe you have, because you have your two arms, you could actually like lean on one arm and start attacking, keep on attacking still. So there are many different variations. You could delve into all the different tactical implications of suffering damage to each part of your mech. I recommend that when you play your first games, you play first with a one-on-one, that is each player with just one mech, because the introductory rules recommend that you play a mission with each player handling 4 mechs, but I think that could be a bit excessive for some players. Play with just a single mech each, and as you get what would you say, adjusted, or you start to understand the strengths and weaknesses of all of the different mechs, I start adding a few more to have more interesting battles with more ways on how to confuse and attack your opponent. Because sometimes you memorize the things, not always, but you will start to memorize the distances and the properties of different weapons, and so you won't have to look all the time at the sheets. I also recommend that during each combat round you follow a specific order. So for example, let's say that you made an attack and you find it a bit intimidating, that you don't even know where to start taking factors into consideration. Just grab your cheat board and check. Let's see, did my attacker, did my mech move this turn? No, he remains stationary. Okay, so I don't have a penalty to my attack. Or maybe you check and you say, is my opponent standing at a certain terrain that is in the forest or behind this short mountain? Oh yes, he's actually in the woods, heavy woods, so he gets a +2 to the modifier. So you have to check step by step. But as I was saying, as you play, as you get more practice, this will be faster. When I play the game, I'm doing somewhat of a lousy job explaining, but when I play, I'm like, okay, did I move? No. Is there terrain? No. How many hexes did the target move? 3, and so on. So it becomes a bit faster. I would also recommend that you use highly skilled mech warriors with your first playthroughs, because they recommend some average skills when it comes to gunnery and piloting skills, and those have to do to see how much you need to roll to hit an opponent or to save yourself from suffering damage when your mech falls down and such. So if you have a capable pilot inside that mech, you're going to have an easier time. Otherwise, you're going to be missing all the time. Trust me, and it could become a bit tedious. That's another important consideration. Some matches could take a bit of a while. I've played matches that have, especially if you're the players are analyzing things and taking their time. I've played matches that have lasted like 4 hours. Some of them we have actually had to put on hold, and we'll leave things like they are in the table, and different day we continue playing. So this game, it's a game that I would qualify like a thinking man's game, but at the same time, as I was telling you, that all of that level of detail could be too intimidating for most of the players out there or gamers. But despite all of that, I love Battletech. I've even purchased the full rulebook. I also gotten the campaign books, Sword and Dragon. Maybe I will review that later on, some other day. And it's what I love about it, that level of strategy, of tactics, of realism. One day I was playing a game and I had my map of the inner sphere in another table, and then I was watching an episode of the Battletech cartoon, and it felt like everything was Battletech suddenly. So that level of immersiveness is quite great. and the way that you can scale that level of play, adding more rules. There are books that actually give you the option of burning down forests so that the enemy mechs hit up faster, or that there are also other conditions of fighting battles in outer space, perhaps on top of a base of sorts in outer space, and also different weather effects, nighttime conditions. I'm not sure, but I also heard that there were sometimes ways on how to play taking cyclones and earthquakes into consideration. I'm not entirely sure about that, but to my understanding, there are many ways in which you can add that level of realism to the game. Now, when it comes to the role-playing game, I think that on its own, it's hardly a decent role-playing game. When you consider it as an accessory to this main Battletech experience, I think it's pretty good. But as a standalone role-playing game, some would consider it even mediocre. It fails a bit to communicate that flavor of Battletech. Maybe some other day I will be able to review that as well. But what I find it a bit unforgivable as a standalone role-playing game is that you get basically no rules to pilot spaceships and, of course, mechs. If you expect to buy a Battletech role-playing game, you will expect the rules to at least a simplified system to have like mech battles, but it doesn't have that. And they say if you want to know how to pilot these vehicles, you need these other 4 books. And even though there are some ways around it to perhaps just get 2 more books, it would feel quite lackluster when compared with other excellent science fiction role-playing games out there, such as Stars Without Number, Mindjammer, and in a certain way the other version of Traveler, not the current one. You could also compare it to other science fiction role-playing games like Godbound, that also has mechs, and other science fiction games that have rules for spaceships and mechs, like the science fiction supplement for Savage Worlds, or the even the interface 2.0. So I find it somewhat unforgivable that the Battletech role-playing game as a standalone experience does not contain any rules on how to have simplified mech battles. So maybe, as I was telling you, in the future I plan to review that role-playing game on its own, but I think it would disappoint a non-Battletech player as a standalone RPG experience. But this introductory box set for Battletech, it's quite excellent, and it's going to last you quite a bit. Just, I will only say, avoid it if you're someone who's looking for a very simple experience and who doesn't like simulationist type of games, because this game is actually going to make you feel like you are piloting a battle mech, so much so that it could feel too real for some. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.